Well, this auger bit gave me trouble, and I never want to walk away from a fight angry, and I never want to put a tool away dull. So let's see why it's giving me trouble. To try and figure out why the CS Jennings cutter wasn't cutting well, I pulled out an Irwin auger that I knew was working and checked one against the other. When I checked the back angle on the cutter, the Irwin had a good 10 or 15 degree angle on the cutter. Gave it enough clearance for the bit not to rub as it went around, and even if a little chip got underneath the bit, it was able to ride over the top of it and still bite in and cut. That's the relief that you need to make sure that the cutter doesn't just rub. Now on the CS Jennings, it was almost perpendicular to the center line of the bit, which meant that it had no relief. All it took was just a whisker underneath that cutter bit and it stopped cutting. Once that stopped cutting, it plugged up almost immediately. Now I didn't have enough metal there to actually do any filing on it to change the angle. If I cut that much away, the cutter would only be a whisker of steel there. Since the cutter would be absolutely worthless if I didn't do anything to it, I decided the best thing to do would be to form the cutter at a steeper angle and give myself a little bit more clearance on that cutter. So I've got a small chisel. I'm going to take that small chisel and see if I can't drive it into that opening and increase the angle on the cutter. Doesn't take much. It's a thin little piece of steel. I didn't want to crack it off. I was able to move the steel, but it just opened up the gap. It didn't really change the angle a whole lot. I was trying to figure out how I was going to make a difference in the way that cutter was bent. I wanted to be able to have just the front lip raised. So now I'm going to try and do a three-handed job with just two hands. To drive down the back edge of the cutter. There comes the third hand. Now I've got a much better angle on the cutter. Now I'm drilling a pilot in there just to give the bit a chance to get re-engaged, but it's not working. So I'm trying opening up that cutter a little bit more again. Now I'm sharpening the edge. See if I can get that bevel the right way. Still stripping out. I've removed the cutter. And I'm trying just the pilot by itself. It's boring okay. So if that's working, even though it's still plugging, now I'm going to stone that cutter. The front face of the cutter is a little pitted, and the bevel's not quite exactly where it's supposed to be. And I want to have this cutter working when I'm done with it. Now, okay, I paid $1 or $2 for the drill bit, and I'm putting a lot more time into it than what it's really worth, but it's not about the idea of whether the bit has any value in it after I'm done. It's, can I make it work? It's a challenge. A little alcohol makes sure the swarf gets wiped off the stone. Makes it cut a little better, keeps it sharp. Once I've established the bevel and polished the edge, I take the stone and knock the burr off the top of the cutter. I don't want to remove any metal. All I want to do is just knock the burr off. And I don't want to change the angle of the cutter either. No metal should be removed, just a polish. While I was at it, I took the stone and polished the edge of the spur. That's supposed to be as sharp as a marking gauge and as strong as a chisel edge. It has to do a lot of work. It needs to be sharp in order to remove the amount of pressure on it as it's cutting through the wood. Now let's reassemble it and try it again. cutting right on through. The wing is making a nice smooth chip. It's ejecting it out of the hole because it's got enough room to remove it with that cutter set to the wide position. With the radial cutting edge on the body of the cutter set wider so it's got a better relief angle, it's not jamming anymore. Now just before I punch through, I want to flip the wood over and cut through from the other side. Now I'm making a mistake here. I don't have the cutter entering completely vertically into the wood. Letting it orbit. What that's doing is making it so the cutter doesn't cut completely around the outside edge. Leaves one side still attached. Now that it's tuned up and working correctly, just how long does it take to get through a 2x4 with this auger bit? Start. Through in just under a minute.